A child wakes up in the middle of the night. The room is silent. The fire in the hearth is almost dead. And then, by the last glow of the embers, the child sees something that does not belong in this world. A figure is crouched over the bed. A familiar face, a mother, an aunt, a grandmother, and she is eating the child's heart. This is not a scene from a horror film. This is not a modern invention. For centuries across the Slavic world, in the mountains of Serbia, in the forests of Croatia, in the villages of Bulgaria and Poland, this was a real, constant, suffocating fear. The fear that the woman sleeping in the next room might, at this very moment, be flying through the sky to feast on the souls of her own family. Tonight, we step into the dark world of the Slavic witch, where she came from, how she took to the sky, what she stole, and the desperate, ancient rituals that families use to keep her out of the home. Stay with me, because this story gets darker than you think. Before we begin, pull up a chair. This channel is still small, which means right now it kind of feels like sitting around a fire with a few friends and trading the old stories. If that sounds good to you, the subscribe button saves you a seat. All right, let's begin. In the Slavic world, a witch was not a green-skinned hag living alone in a cottage in the woods. She was something far more terrifying. She was your neighbor. She was your aunt. She could be your wife. She could be your own mother. She lived among you. She baked bread. She tended the fields. She came to your wedding. And while her body lay sleeping beside her husband at night, her soul, dark, unclean, and hungry, would slip out of her skin and rise into the air. Some women, the old stories say, became witches by choice. They sold their souls to the devil in exchange for power. But others were born already marked. A girl born wrapped in a piece of the birth membrane, what the villagers called a red shirt, was destined for it. A girl born under certain phases of the moon was destined for it. From the moment she drew her first breath, her path was set, and there was no escape from it. And here is the cruelest twist. Although the witch is remembered in folklore as old, ugly, and bent with age, she could appear in any form she wanted. She could walk into the village as the most beautiful young woman anyone had ever seen, the face of innocence, hiding the appetite of a demon. The Slavic word for witch comes from an ancient root meaning to know. She was, quite simply, one of the knowing ones, someone who saw what others could not, someone who walked between worlds. So how does a witch take to the sky? It begins with a small black pot, hidden in the shadow of the hearth. Inside that pot is an ointment, a thick, foul-smelling grease that no honest woman would ever touch. The recipe is whispered down from witch to witch, and it is not for the faint of heart. Human fat, fresh blood, bitter herbs boiled together under a fading moon. Before flight, she strips naked. She dips her fingers into the pot, and she smears the grease beneath her arms. Then she speaks the words, a precise incantation that must be recited without error. Translated into English, it means roughly this: not into the thorn, not into the bush, but onto the swept threshing floor. One wrong syllable, one slip of the tongue, and the spell turns against her. She crashes into the thorns. She tangles in the branches. The night punishes any witch who is careless with her own magic. And forget what cartoons have taught you. The broomstick is only one option. Slavic witches were said to fly on shovels, on wooden poles, on weaving tools, on a simple log ripped from the woodpile. Anything could become a vessel of the sky, if you knew the right words to say. But where do witches go when they fly? They gather, in large covens, on specific sacred nights. Saturday was always a favorite. So were the eves of the greatest holidays in the village calendar. The night before Christmas, the night before the spring feast of St. George, the night before midsummer. Their meeting places were always wild and high, lonely mountain peaks, cliffs above the river. and above all, one tree, the walnut. The old people said that witches flocked to the walnut tree the way bats flock to a cave. If a walnut grew tall and twisted near your home, you watched it, especially on the dangerous nights. When they arrived, they danced, a frantic, demonic circle of women spinning in the dark. They feasted on food stolen from human kitchens. They drank from cups no living person should ever see. And at the center of it all stood the head witch, the leader who handed out the assignments for the week ahead. Whose cow would dry up next? Whose child would fall sick? Whose husband would die in the field? The threshing floor, that flat open patch of ground where grain was beaten from its husks, was another favorite gathering place. And the villagers warned again and again that anyone who wandered onto a witch's threshing floor at night would never be the same. Some were struck dead on the spot. Others were left alive, but driven so deeply into madness that death would have been a kindness. But the witch's hunger was not only for human flesh. She came for the livestock too. And in a Slavic village where an entire family might depend on a single cow or a handful of sheep, this was a catastrophe waiting to happen. Families would wake to find their cow giving no milk. The cream would not churn into butter. The sheep would collapse in the pen for no reason at all. The witch was always blamed. She was said to ride naked on a wooden weaving beam around her neighbor's barn on the eve of certain holidays. And by sunrise, the milk would simply transfer from their cows to hers. Or worse, she would change her shape entirely, into a fat, ugly toad squatting in the corner of the barn, into a large gray moth fluttering quietly between the rafters, and in this stolen form she would drink directly from the udders of the sleeping animals. And it did not stop there. When hail tore through the wheat fields, the witch was blamed. When the rains failed and the soil cracked, the witch was blamed. She was said to ride at the head of the great black storm clouds, steering them like a chariot toward the fields of anyone who had ever crossed her. And now we come to the darkest part of the story, the part the villagers whispered, but almost never spoke out loud. The witch's favorite victims were not strangers. They were not enemies in some distant village. They were her own family. There is an old proverb in the Slavic world. A witch runs to her own blood. Her husband, her children, her grandchildren. These were the ones she preferred to destroy. And the ritual was always the same. While her body lay in the bed beside her sleeping husband, looking for all the world like a corpse, her soul slipped free. It took the shape of a small gray moth. It squeezed through the keyhole of the neighbor's door. It drifted, silent, into the bedroom of her chosen victim. She would stand over the sleeping child. She would tap the left side of the chest with a small wand, and the flesh would open, bloodlessly, silently, as if it had never been closed at all. She would reach inside, and she would take the heart. Sometimes she ate it on the spot. Sometimes she carried it away to share with her sisters on the mountain. But before she left, she would whisper one final thing, a sentence, a decree, the exact date and the exact manner of the victim's death. In 3 days, in 3 years, by falling from a horse, by drowning in the river, by a fever in the winter. And then the chest would close. The skin would seal without a scar, and the child would wake the next morning, alive, smiling, completely unaware, already a walking corpse with an invisible expiration date. So, how did anyone survive? The Slavic families fought back with an entire arsenal of small, desperate, ancient rituals. The single greatest weapon was garlic. Witches, the stories agreed, hated it above all other things. On the dangerous nights, the people of the village would crush garlic and rub it onto their feet, onto their chests, under their arms, the very same place the witch smeared her flying ointment. Hawthorn branches with their sharp thorns were laid across the doorway because they were believed to catch and tear a witch's spirit. Pots were turned upside down. Clothes were worn inside out to confuse her. A broom was placed behind the door with its sweeping end pointing up. A quiet, stubborn gesture meant to push her back into the dark. And when a woman in the village was suspected of being a witch, when too many cows dried up, when too many children sickened, she was put to the trial by water. She was bound at the hands and feet. She was thrown into the river. And the logic was simple and merciless. A true witch, the people said, could not sink. The water itself would reject her. If she floated, she was guilty, and she was put to death. If she sank, she was innocent, and the villagers would pull her body from the river if they got there in time. But there was a way out. If a suspected witch came forward willingly, confessed her power, and swore to use her knowledge only for healing, never for harm, the village would let her live. She would become the local healer, the wise woman, the one called in the middle of the night when a child had a high fever or a young wife could not conceive. Because in the end, the Slavic world understood something that we have largely forgotten. The line between the witch and the healer was never as wide as we like to pretend. Both of them knew things that the rest of us did not. The Slavic witch is not just a story told to frighten children into bed. She is a window into an entire worldview, a world where the supernatural lived inside the home, where the greatest danger was not a monster in the forest, but the woman sleeping in the next room, where every closed door, every hung broom, every clove of garlic was a small daily act of war against the darkness. If you enjoyed this descent into the folklore of the night, subscribe and ring the bell, because next time we open another door into the old world. Until then, sleep with the light on. And maybe, just maybe, leave a head of garlic by the bed.